convention delegates had their way in 1944, Henry A. Wallace would have been elected to a second term as vice president and succeeded Franklin Delano Roosevelt as the 33rd President of the United States. The party bosses made sure that didn't happen.
Secretary of Commerce Henry A. Wallace comes to the White House to hear from President Truman the direction U.S. foreign policy will take. Wallace's New York speech, which had a strong pro-Russian tone, made the Secretary the center of a storm that swept between the White House and the State Department. After the conference, Mr. Wallace tells reporters he will curb his speech-making until after the Paris parleys. He will not resign his cabinet post.
From his apartment in Washington, CBS brings you Henry A. Wallace, who earlier today resigned at the request of President Truman from his position as Secretary of Commerce, thus ending 13 years' service for the government. This will be Mr. Wallace's first public statement since his resignation, which was brought about because his ideas of what America's foreign policy should be differ from those of the administration. Mr. Wallace.
My fellow Americans, winning the peace is more important than high public office. It is more important than any consideration of party politics. I feel that our present foreign policy does not recognize the basic realities which led to 2 world wars and which now threaten another war, this time an atomic war. I wish to make clear again that I am against all types of imperialism and aggression, whether they are of Russian, British, or American origin. Also, I wish to emphasize that the one world concept must be held steadfastly, and that any regionalism necessary to give practical form to world economic and political realities must take into account the rights of small nations, just as the nations of the Western Hemisphere have done under Franklin Roosevelt's good neighbor policy. The success of any policy rests ultimately upon the confidence and the will of the people. There can be no basis for such success unless the people know and understand the issues, unless they are given all the facts, and unless they seize the opportunity to take part in the framing of foreign policy through full and open debate. In this debate, we must respect the rights and interests of other peoples, just as we expect them to respect ours.
Henry Wallace was a champion of what he called the common man. As Vice President of the United States and one of the chief architects of FDR's New Deal, he fought for the rights of ordinary people against elitism, racism, and unchecked corporate power.
We are here tonight to state that the Truman Doctrine endangers peace. We are here tonight to assert that the peace requires Americans to reject that doctrine and reaffirm their faith in a strong United Nations. Our soldiers did not win one war in order to fight another. Our workers and farmers toiled for freedom, not for fear. Our dead did not bequeath to their children a legacy of death. The world is hungry. The world cries out, not for American tanks and guns to destroy more lives and leave more hunger, but for American plows and food to fulfill the promise of peace. The world is afraid. The world cries out, not for an American crusade in the name of hatred and fear of communism, but for a world crusade in the name of the brotherhood of man. Today, America is in danger of turning aside. In the name of crisis, the President asks America to help the undemocratic governments of Greece and Turkey. In the name of crisis, America is asked to ignore the World Tribunal of the United Nations and take upon herself the role of prosecutor, judge, jury, and sheriff What a role! In the name of crisis, facts are withheld. Time is denied. Hysteria is whipped up. The Congress is asked to rush through a momentous decision as if great armies were already on the march. 19 days ago, the President of the United States told the Congress that the people of Greece were hungry and needed our help. Was this news to the President or to the Department of State, which advises him? Every responsible member of the government has known since the war ended that Greece lay in ruins and that famine was at the throat of her people. Every responsible member of the government and every member of Congress knows today the hunger, the poverty, the devastation which rides over Poland, Italy, Yugoslavia, the Ukraine, and White Russia. 70% of the livestock of Poland has been destroyed. The children of Italy and Yugoslavia wear rags for clothes. Millions of the people of Central Europe have no shoes to wear. 10 million people in the Ukraine are homeless. Do these facts constitute a crisis? Or is a man's belly empty only when his mind is full of approved thoughts? Action to help the world must help America, but not the action the President proposes. The needs of a desperate people are being exploited for other ends. The truth is that the President and his Republican backers are less concerned with the need of the Greek people for food than with the need of the American Navy for oil. The plan to contain communism is really secondary to the push for oil. For every glamorous admiral who boasts it's nobody's damn business where we go, there are 10 drab but practical procurement officers to add, and we'll get there with the oil of the Middle East. When Britain competes for these resources, we settle our differences as friends. When Russia competes for them, we sound a fire alarm and thank God for the atom bomb. Why is that? Great nations, including Russia and America, struggled for oil long before there were communists in the Kremlin. Poverty, which causes communism, will be ended not by beating drums of hatred, but by world plenty. I shall not blame America alone for the present tensions, and I shall criticize Russia when I think Russia is wrong, but I do assert that a great part of our conflict with Russia is the normal conflict between two strong and sovereign nations, which can be solved in normal ways. When some Americans assert that it is hopeless to seek an agreement with Russia in the Balkans and the Middle East, I answer, how do we know? A program for United Nations development in the Balkans and the Middle East has not been tried. As for Russia's possible use of the veto, we can no more justify a decision to bypass the United Nations on that ground than a private citizen can justify a decision to take the law in his own hands because he fears he may not have a fair trial in the court established to determine his rights. If we took the matter to the United Nations and the Russians exercised their veto, the moral burden would be on them. When we act independently outside the framework of the United Nations, the moral burden is on us. It is sheer nonsense to assert that we have sought solutions through cooperation. America and Britain have divided the oil of the Middle East as though we were conquerors and Lord protectors of the realm. At Yalta, we solemnly agreed that Turkey's grip on the Dardanelles would be loosened by mutual consultation after victory. At Potsdam, we reaffirmed that agreement. Not one step has been taken in 18 months of peace. In the long and bitter winter of 1947, the world agency which could have saved lives and prevented misery was killed. Almost all of the United Nations, except America and Britain, supported Fiorello LaGuardia's plan to save UNRWA. The defeat of that plan was a world tragedy. Through months of inaction, the Congress strangled the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration. The President countersigned its death warrant. And now we are told that America must act alone in Greece and Turkey because there isn't time to create a United Nations agency for relief and rehabilitation. In the Assembly of the United Nations, Senators Vandenberg and Connolly said that nothing could be done to free the Spanish people because the United Nations had no right to interfere in the internal affairs of any nation. By what right do these same Americans justify unilateral interference in the affairs of Greece and Turkey? The administration and its Republican supporters argue that we must intervene alone in Greece because the United Nations is too weak to act. If the United Nations is weak, who makes it weak? What is the United Nations but the nations who belong to it? What have they done to make it strong? Today, the budget of the United Nations is $6 million less than the budget of the New York City Sanitation Department. And who was it who insisted on keeping the budget of the United Nations $6 million lower than the amount spent to keep the streets of New York City clean? The Soviet government certainly wished to keep the budget low. Speaking in the name of a stingy-minded Republican Congress, Senator Vandenberg cried, "Amen." In December, Senator Vandenberg was willing to spend only $11 million for the United Nations. Today, he is ready to spend untold millions to prop up anti-Soviet regimes. There is but one hope for world peace: the United Nations. The Greek problem is a world problem and must be settled by the United Nations. If there is a Turkish problem, it too is a concern of all members of the United Nations. That's the spirit in which the Charter was signed. We ask that the United Nations undertake a new program for relief of all peace-loving peoples that have been devastated by war and that today are in need. We ask that American funds be made available for this purpose. We ask that the United Nations establish regional commissions for the reconstruction of Europe, the Middle East, and other areas as part of an overall plan. We ask that the United Nations face the problem of security not piecemeal but on a worldwide basis. This means the internationalization of the Dardanelles, the Suez Canal, and the Panama Canal.
On Monday of this week, the President handed us a bill. It was a bill for the first down payment on a 20-year program of sending arms to Western Europe. It was a bill for $1.5 billion, $50 for every American family. But that's only the first year's cost. Next year it'll be more, because modern weapons of war get more expensive all the time. We shall be lucky if at the end of 20 years we have spent less than $50 billion on the North Atlantic Pact. But no bill has yet been submitted to provide jobs for the millions of unemployed. I've come here tonight to tell the American people that when we are taxed, presumably to stop Russia and communism by shipping arms to other nations, we open the door to the real aggressors against all people everywhere: waste, depression, hatred, and finally that supreme waste, the frustration of unemployment. There are cynical men who tell you that our arms program puts men to work. I say that any prosperity that depends on such wasteful and criminal employment is certain to end in disaster. I say it is wasteful to produce arms when men need houses and schools and roads and hospitals. I say it is criminal to drain our resources to produce goods that no one can use except for war. And it is dishonest to say that producing arms will also produce prosperity. The administration has spent countless billions for arms, but those billions have not stopped the gathering storm of an economic crisis either at home or abroad. When President Truman asked for military aid for Greece and Turkey in March of 1947, I said that if the Truman Doctrine were continued, the United States would bleed from every pore. And every year since then, Democrats and Republicans have joined hands in taking tens of billions of dollars away from you and me on the pretext of defending us and the world from aggression. The same men in Congress who hold up their hands in horror at the idea of using government money to create peacetime employment in the United States cheerfully vote billions to create disaster abroad. We have spent over $20 billion building a wall against Eastern Europe. We now propose to man that wall with arms. On Monday, the President asked for $1.5 billion for more arms to Europe. His arms message was urgent. But 2 weeks ago, when he announced his domestic program, there was no urgency. Of course not. And the result is that the Brannan Farm program has been dropped by Congress. There is no effective minimum wage increase, and there is only a token payment for public works. The President is full of pledges against aggression when there are no signs of aggression. Here in the United States, leadership in Congress is slowly emerging to fight the insane course of world military action which is fostered by the administration.
Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Take it on the run, on the run, on the run. Hear them calling you and me, every son of liberty. Hurry right away, no delay, go today. Make your daddy glad to have had such a lad. Tell your sweetheart not to pine, to be proud her boy's in line. Over there, send the word over there, that the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming, the drums rum-tumming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer, send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over.